Acts chapter 8. Stephen has just been stoned to death. The coats of those who were the witnesses, basically, which means who were throwing the stones, were laid at the feet of a man named Saul. And in Acts 8:1, it's clear that Saul was not just a convenient guy to put coats down with, right? And Saul approved of their killing him. Now, it's hard for me to get my hands around, or my brain around, how deep the bitterness and resentment were for these guys to drag Stephen out and throw rocks on him till he died. His last words were, "Don't hold this sin against them." And Saul approved of their killing him. Man. Then verse 1 continues, "On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria." So the death of Stephen launched a wider persecution against the church. I think I'll just come back to this. I've said it a bunch of times. We don't have any concept of persecution. We have a pretty clear concept of inconvenience, but we don't know anything about persecution. There are men and women who maybe there is some persecution in our country, because there are men and women who have been harassed, and a number of them have been harassed by our current government because of their faith and because of standing for their faith. But the rest of us, I've never been persecuted. I'm pretty sure you haven't. Anyway, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And here's how the intensity of that persecution was such that everybody except the apostles left Jerusalem. There was a huge exodus, and they were scattered through Judea and Samaria. Now, this is interesting because remember in Acts 1:8, Jesus had said, "You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth." That was both a commission and a prophecy. Now here, the commission and prophecy is apparently fulfilled. In verse 2, godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. That's pretty much how it works. The godly mourn the death of godly people, but people who are not godly, not so much. Well, that's huge insight. Verse 3, but Saul began to destroy the church. It's as though they had lit a fire in him with the stoning of Stephen. Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. You have to remember that in that day, the Jewish leaders had authority, or took authority, that was somewhat beyond what should have been their actual reach. But the Romans, my sense is that Romans didn't really care. The Romans who were in Jerusalem at that time, these are the Roman officials and the Roman military, they didn't really want to even be there. And so it's almost like, yeah, whatever. Well, the Jews took advantage of that. Now, supposedly they weren't supposed to execute anyone, but they just had executed Stephen. In order to kill Jesus, they had to obtain the permission from Pilate, but evidently they had permission or seized the opportunity and imprisoned men and women who were believers in Jesus. Now, there's a part of me that I think this generation, this first generation of followers of Jesus would have been a little bit obvious because of their lifestyle. Actually, more than a little bit obvious. On the other hand, though, I'm thinking, okay, I wonder, Saul was so eaten up with this, I am going to destroy this sect, that he went from house to house and dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. So what was going to happen after prison? Well, we don't know. But we do know families would have been, well, I don't even know the right word, to a degree destroyed. It's not just a disruption. What are you going to do with these children? Well, they would have, one aspect of the culture in that day was that families, you rarely had a family member who was, more than a short walk from the rest of the family, so that the children would have then been taken care of by extended family members. But the apostles had modeled the fact that if you're going to stand with Jesus and stand for him, you're going to have to stand against the prevailing Jewish culture. And it sent them to prison, or to jail anyway. Verse 4. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. When I was a kid, Matthew 28:19 got preached about a lot in the little church that my dad preached at. Go ye therefore into all the world. Well, of course, that's King James, but when I was in my teenage years, I think it was my dad. This is one of the few things I remember about my dad's preaching. That's not to my credit or his discredit. I was just a kid. But I do remember the verb tense in that verse also could mean as you go into the whole world. Teach, baptize, and teach. Well, here that's what happened. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. I don't know that happens, in my experience, very much with very many people. I tell you who, my experience is the people who are most likely to be this way are the people who have most recently been saved. Their enthusiasm for what Jesus has done for them, it just leaks out of them. That was one of the, I'm going to call it fun because it was fun, but it was even something more than fun. When Debbie and I were at Canyon Ridge Christian Church in Las Vegas, most of the growth of that church over the span of its life was through adult conversions. And we saw it happen again and again and again. A man or a woman came to Christ and gave their lives up to Him. They began to experience a transformation, and wherever they worked, wherever they played, in their neighborhood, they told people, and they would bring people to our church where they would hear the good news, the gospel. Well, I fell in love with that experience. Now, when I was a kid, my excuse, and I still kind of use it, is I do not have the gift of evangelism. I can speak freely and often well about Jesus, but I'm not the guy that's going to take a plane ride, get off the plane, and go baptize the seatmate. I have a friend like that, but I'm not that guy. I'm probably the guy that might get into a conversation with my seatmate and try to introduce the grace of Christ into that conversation. But I'm not likely to be the guy to, take it all the way home and then seek out a place to baptize the guy. So, and when I was a teenager, the idea of go ye therefore into all the world, but kind of scared me. Well, not even kind of, it really scared me. Because I kind of in my mind thought I don't think I'm a missionary. I don't think I want to be a missionary. I grew up, and there was a point in my life I said, God, I'll do anything except don't send me to Mud Hut, Africa. I can't do it. When I realized, when I said yes to Jesus, for me, it was conditional. Yes, Jesus, except don't mess with my world very much. And I think that's what a lot of people do. Until I finally gave in and said, okay, if you want me in Mud Hut, Africa, then you send me. I'll go. I'll probably leave skid marks for where they had to drag me out, but I will go. These first-generation Christians, they left not because they got better business opportunities. They left because of persecution. These were refugees. But wherever they went, they saw the opportunity to proclaim the good news of Jesus, and they preached the word wherever they went. How was that? Did they gather a bunch of people and set up a platform with a pulpit and start this evangelistic campaign? I don't think so. Number one, that's not really how it happened in that culture. There's a possibility that some, maybe even many, were able to speak to larger crowds, but the greater possibility is that they proclaimed the good news of Jesus to the people in their circle. And that puts us where you and I basically live. My time's up, so I'm going to close. We'll come back to this a little bit next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.